The signal of desperation. The vast emptiness of space stretched endlessly before Captain Darius Kane, the pilot and owner of the Valkyrie, a well-worn but reliable starship. For the past 3 days, he had been drifting through the outer rim of the Nix sector, where few dared to travel. The region was infamous, filled with pirates, slavers, and lost colonies that had long been abandoned by the central governments. Darius preferred it this way. No rules, no obligations, just him and the stars. But then, the distress signal came. A faint, static-filled transmission cut through the silence of his cockpit. At first, he thought it was a glitch, one of the many broken beacons that occasionally sent out ghost signals. But then he heard it. A voice, a woman's voice. Weak, desperate. "Take me, protect my child. Please, before they come." Darius stiffened. His instincts told him to ignore it. Distress signals in this part of space were rarely honest. It could be a trap, a lure set by slavers, or worse, a dead end that would lead to his own demise. But there was something in her voice. Something real. Darius exhaled sharply, rubbing his jaw. Damn it. He reached for the controls and plotted a course toward the signal source. The planet below. The Valkyrie entered low orbit over a planet covered in thick storms and shifting deserts. It was a dying world, one that had once been populated, but now only held the ghosts of a forgotten empire. The distress signal was coming from a ruined outpost near the equator. Darius adjusted his thrusters and descended through the thick atmosphere. The turbulence rattled the ship, but the Valkyrie had survived worse. As he got closer, the scanners picked up something unusual. There were no life signs, no settlements, nothing but a single weak energy signature. Darius frowned. Either this is the dumbest decision I've ever made, or someone's really good at hiding. He landed the ship near the ruins, grabbed his pulse pistol, and stepped into the scorching heat of the desert. The woman in the ruins. The wind howled as Darius made his way through the broken remains of what had once been a grand city. He followed the signal, moving past crumbling towers and collapsed structures. And then he saw her. A woman standing at the edge of a collapsed bridge, her body frail and covered in dust. Her silver-blue skin was marked with faint scars, her dark hair tangled from the wind. But her eyes, glowing violet, locked onto his the moment he appeared. And in her arms, a small child wrapped tightly in fabric, breathing shallowly. She didn't move, didn't react. She just watched him, waiting. Darius lowered his weapon slightly. "You the one who sent the distress call?" She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "You came." A desperate plea. Darius took a cautious step closer. "Who are you?" The woman swayed slightly, exhaustion threatening to overtake her. "My name is Syria, and this is my son." Darius glanced at the child. Pale, too quiet. He couldn't be older than 2, maybe 3 years. Darius tightened his grip on his pistol. "Who are you running from?" Syria's lips trembled. Her body shook as she struggled to hold herself upright. "They will come. They always do. Please, take my child. Keep him safe. Take me. Do whatever you want. But please, let my son live." Darius's blood ran cold. This wasn't just a distress call. This was a sacrifice. She was offering herself to him, in exchange for her child's life. The wrong kind of people. Darius clenched his jaw. Something about this felt too big, too dangerous. If someone was chasing this woman, if she was willing to give herself up just to keep her son safe, then whoever was coming was the wrong kind of people. And if he took them aboard, they wouldn't just be running. They would be hunted. Darius exhaled, shaking his head. "Lady, I'm not a slaver. I don't take people as bargaining chips." Syria blinked, as if surprised by his answer. "Then, you will not take him either." Darius sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. He was a smuggler, not a hero. Not a soldier. Not a savior. But he wasn't cruel. And he sure as hell wasn't going to leave a mother and her kid to die. He holstered his pistol and gestured toward his ship. "Both of you, come with me. We'll figure it out later." Syria's breath hitched. "You mean, you will not trade me?" Darius frowned. "I don't trade lives." For a moment, Syria just stared at him. Then, something changed. For the first time, she looked afraid. And that's when Darius realized she had never met someone who didn't take something from her. The enemy arrives. Before she could say another word, a distant roar filled the sky. Darius's stomach dropped. He turned toward the horizon, his eyes narrowing. A ship. No, two. Sleek, black, armed to the teeth, and heading right for them. Syria's hands tightened around her child. Darius muttered a curse. "We need to leave. Now." He grabbed her arm, pulling her forward as the ships descended rapidly. The hunters had arrived. And now it was too late to turn back. The price of protection. The roar of engines filled the air, shaking the crumbling ruins around them. Darius didn't waste a second. "Move," he barked, pulling Syria forward. She clutched her child tightly, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Above them, the two warships descended, sleek and black, their insignias worn but unmistakable, the Sovereign Guard. Darius muttered a curse. "You didn't say you were running from them." Syria stumbled but didn't stop moving. "Would it have changed your decision?" Darius didn't answer. Because it wouldn't have. And that scared him more than the ships above. The chase begins. The ruins erupted in gunfire. Energy blasts rained down from the enemy warships, kicking up clouds of sand and debris. Darius pulled Syria behind a collapsed wall, shielding her as fire lit up the night. "They're not warning shots," he growled. "They want you dead." Syria's face was pale, her arms wrapped around her son protectively. "They don't care about me." She looked up, eyes burning with something darker than fear. "They want him." Darius's gaze snapped to the child. Still silent, still too calm. But there was something in his violet eyes. Something wrong. Darius shoved the thought aside. "Then let's not let them have him." He grabbed Syria's arm again and ran. A race against death. The Valkyrie was parked half a mile away. An easy sprint if they weren't being hunted. Darius glanced back. His blood went cold. A squad of soldiers had already dropped onto the ruins, moving with precision and speed. Their armor was sleek, almost insect-like, their visors glowing crimson. They weren't here to negotiate. Darius yanked his pistol free and fired. A shot hit one of them square in the chest. They didn't even slow down. Syria pulled at his sleeve. "You cannot fight them. We must run." Damn it, she was right. Darius turned and sprinted, pulling her along with him. But the soldiers were closing in. The ship was too far. They weren't going to make it. And then, the child moved. The child is not normal. Kale had been silent the entire time. Not crying, not panicked. Just watching. And now, as the soldiers raised their rifles, he lifted one tiny hand. Syria's eyes went wide. Kale, no. But it was too late. The air vibrated. Darius felt it before he saw it. A deep, unnatural pressure in his chest, as if something shifted inside reality itself. And then, the soldiers froze. Not just stopped moving. Stopped breathing. Stopped existing. Their forms shattered like glass, dissolving into shimmering particles of light. And then vanished. Darius stood there, stunned. His heart hammered in his chest as he turned to Syria. She was shaking. But not in fear. In grief. "They were right to fear him," she whispered. Darius stared at Kull, who blinked up at him. A child who had just erased 5 trained killers without a word. What the hell is he? The weight of truth. Syria swallowed hard, adjusting her grip on her son. He is the last of the sovereign bloodline. Darius frowned. A prince. Syria shook her head. Something more. She turned to face him fully, her expression unreadable. Darius Kane, do you still wish to protect him? Darius looked at Kale again. At the child who had just rewritten the laws of nature. At the mother who had begged him to take her instead. At the warship above them, still circling, preparing for a second attack. Then, without hesitation, he smirked. Hell yes. The bloodline's secret. The wind howled across the ruins, kicking up dust and ash as the Valkyrie's engines roared to life. Darius didn't look back. There was no time. Syria held Kel close, her breathing shallow, her violet eyes glowing in the dim light. Above them, the Sovereign Guard warship hovered like a predator, its cannons glowing hot, ready to fire. The warning had been clear. Surrender the child, or be destroyed. Darius gritted his teeth. Not today. He pulled Syria up the ship's ramp, slamming the hatch shut behind them. The moment it sealed, the ground shook. The first cannon blast struck the ruins where they had stood just seconds before. Darius bolted to the cockpit. Strap in. Syria clutched Kel tightly and sat down as the ship's engines screamed to full power. The Sovereign Guard wasn't playing games anymore. They were here to end this. The impossible chase. The Valkyrie shot into the sky, pushing past the storm clouds, weaving through debris left behind from an ancient battle that had long since been forgotten. Darius pushed the engines past safe limits. Behind them, the enemy warship pursued, firing relentlessly. Shields at 38%, the ship's AI reported. Darius cursed under his breath. The Valkyrie wasn't a warship. It was built for speed and maneuverability. But against sovereign technology, he was outmatched. Hang on. Darius growled as he yanked the controls to the left, barely dodging a blast that would have torn the ship in half. Syria's knuckles turned white as she held onto Kale. She turned to Darius, her voice urgent. We will not outrun them. Darius shot her a look. If you got a better idea, now's the time. Syria's eyes darkened. She glanced down at her son, who remained eerily calm, his tiny fingers clutching her sleeve. And then she said something that sent a chill down Darius's spine. Let me take the controls. The mother's power. Darius hesitated. Syria, fly his ship. They didn't have time for this. Lady, unless you can make this thing turn invisible or sprout a fleet of cannons, we don't have a choice but to run. Syria's gaze was steady. Trust me. Something about the way she said it made Darius pause. Then, reluctantly, he lifted his hands from the controls. Syria slid into the pilot's chair, her fingers hovering over the ship's command panel. Her eyes flashed. And then, the entire ship pulsed with energy. Darius felt it immediately. A shift, a ripple in the air. Something ancient and powerful. Then, to his absolute shock, the Valkyrie vanished from the enemy's radar. The lost science of the sovereigns. Darius's jaw tightened. He checked the controls. Nothing had changed. But the Sovereign Guard. They were no longer firing. Their ship hovered in place, scanning wildly, as if they had lost sight of their prey. Darius turned to Syria, eyes narrowed. What the hell did you just do? Syria exhaled, her shoulders trembling. I used the gift of my people. Darius scowled. That's not an answer. Syria's violet eyes met his. My kind, we were once rulers, not warriors. We built empires. We did not destroy them. She placed a hand on the control panel. This ship, it carries metal from the old worlds. From before the war. That metal remembers. Darius's mind reeled. You're saying you can manipulate the ship itself. Syria nodded. Our technology was not about power. It was about harmony. And now, it is helping us survive. Darius exhaled. He wasn't sure what disturbed him more. The fact that Syria had just used an ability he didn't understand, or the fact that the enemy still wasn't leaving. Because deep down, he knew. This wasn't over. Not even close. The enemy's final warning. The Sovereign Guard's warship remained motionless in the distance, its weapons still hot, its scanners still searching. Then, a transmission came through. The voice was cold, calculated. "You think your tricks will save you, exile." Syria stiffened. The voice continued. "We will find you again. You have delayed the inevitable." Darius scoffed, leaning forward. "Yeah, well, you can kiss my..." Syria cut the transmission before he could finish. She turned to him, her expression grave. "This is not a victory." Darius sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I figured." The truth about Kale, still silent, blinked up at them both. Darius stared at the kid, at the child who had wiped soldiers from existence, at the boy whose mother had just bent the laws of physics, and at the warship that refused to leave, because the people inside knew exactly what he was. Darius exhaled. "All right, Syria." He crossed his arms. "No more running. No more half-truths. You're gonna tell me exactly what he is." Syria hesitated. Then, she looked down at Kale, and for the first time, the boy spoke. His voice was soft, but firm. "I am the last of the sovereign kings." Darius felt the weight of those words settle over him. The last. Not just a prince. Not just a fugitive. But a king. A child with power too great to exist. Darius muttered under his breath. "Great, that just made my life a whole lot harder." Syria's lips curled into a small, tired smile. "Welcome to the war, Captain Kane." The weight of a crown. The Valkyrie drifted through hyperspace, the hum of its engines steady but tense. Darius sat in the pilot's seat, staring at the endless void ahead. His fingers tapped the controls, his mind racing. Everything had changed. He wasn't just a smuggler anymore. He wasn't just helping a mother and her son escape. No, he was hiding the last sovereign king. And the entire galaxy would want him dead for it. Behind him, Syria stood quietly, cradling Kale in her arms. The boy had spoken just once. "I am the last of the sovereign kings." Darius exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. "Yeah, kid. No pressure or anything." The captain's dilemma. Syria's voice was soft. "You regret saving us." Darius turned in his seat. His expression was unreadable. "I regret a lot of things. This isn't one of them. Yet." Syria's lips pressed together, her violet eyes searching his face. "Then why do you look afraid?" Darius scoffed. "Afraid? Lady, I'm terrified." He leaned forward. "Do you know what happens when people find out who he is? What he is?" Syria stiffened. "We will keep moving. We will stay ahead of them." Darius shook his head. "That won't work forever." His voice was quieter now. "I need to know what I'm up against. The forgotten war." Syria exhaled slowly. She glanced down at Kal, who was still half asleep, his small hands curled into her cloak. Then, finally, she spoke. "Our people were never meant to rule with war." Darius frowned. "Funny. That's not what history says." Syria's eyes flashed. "Because history was rewritten." Darius's stomach twisted. Syria looked away, her voice distant. The sovereign kings were not conquerors. They were creators. Their rule was built on unity, not fear. Darius narrowed his eyes. "Then why did the war happen?" Syria hesitated. And then, she told him the truth. "Because we were betrayed." The fall of the sovereigns. Darius listened as Syria explained. Hundreds of years ago, the sovereign empire had been the greatest civilization in the galaxy. They didn't conquer planets. They elevated them. Their rule was peaceful, until one of their own betrayed them. A faction known as the Black Sun rose from within, whispering lies, planting fear. They convinced the galaxy that the sovereign kings were too powerful to exist. And so, the war began. One by one, the sovereign cities fell. Their people were hunted, their history erased, and in the end, only one heir survived. Kale, Darius's choice. Darius leaned back, exhaling. So let me get this straight. He rubbed his jaw. The kid's got enough power to wipe people out of existence. The people hunting him are the ones who betrayed his family. And now, I'm stuck in the middle of a civil war that never really ended. Syria nodded. That is correct. Darius let out a dry laugh. Fantastic. Just fantastic. He looked at Kale. The kid's breathing was steady, his small frame barely taking up space in Syria's arms. He looked like an ordinary child. But he wasn't. He was the last of an empire. A future no one was ready for. Darius sighed. All right. We need a plan. Syria tilted her head. A plan. Darius turned back to the controls, flipping switches, bringing up the star charts. If we're gonna survive this, we need allies, safe places, people who don't want to kill us. Syria's brow furrowed. There are none. Darius smirked. Then we make some. The first stop, the underworld. The ship's navigation systems beeped. Darius locked in a destination. Syria glanced at the screen. Her expression darkened. You are taking us to the underworld. Darius grinned. That's right. Syria's lips pressed into a thin line. They will not welcome us. Darius cracked his knuckles. They don't have to. They just have to owe me a favor. Syria watched him, something shifting in her gaze. Then, quietly, she said, You're a dangerous man, Captain Kane. Darius smirked. You have no idea. The devil's bargain. The Valkyrie slipped out of hyperspace, emerging above a planet that shouldn't exist. A world off the charts, buried in old war records, hidden from prying eyes. Syria stiffened as she looked out the viewport. Darius grinned. Welcome to Cordath. Beneath them, the planet stretched out like a scar across the stars. A graveyard of lost wars, ruled by criminals, exiles, and warlords. If the Sovereign Guard hunted them across civilized space, this was where they disappeared, or died trying. A kingdom of shadows. Darius set the ship down on a landing pad that had seen better centuries. The air was thick with smoke and corruption. Towering metal spires, neon lights blinking weakly in the haze, marked the capital, a city where deals were made with whispers and blades. Syria held Kel tightly, her violet eyes scanning their surroundings. Why here? She asked, voice tense. Darius checked his pistol. Because there's only one person in the galaxy crazy enough to help us. Syria's eyes narrowed. And this person owes you. Darius chuckled. More like wants to kill me. Syria sighed. Wonderful. The queen of the underworld. They entered the heart of Cordath's criminal empire, a fortress carved from the bones of a crashed warship, its walls lined with relics of long-dead kings. At the center of it all sat Meravos, the Black Lotus, ruler of Cordath, a legend whispered about in every smuggler's den. She sat on her throne, wrapped in dark silks, her golden eyes glowing beneath the dim lights. Her lips curled into a smirk the moment she saw Darius. Well, well, the infamous Captain Kane. Back from the dead. I see. Darius spread his arms. Miss me? She leaned forward. That depends. Are you here to pay your debt? Darius's grin faltered. Mara's smirk widened. No. Then why shouldn't I have you killed right now? The gamble of a lifetime. Darius didn't blink. He reached out and grabbed Cal's shoulder, pulling him forward. Because I have something worth more than credits. Mara's eyes flickered to the child. Syria tensed beside him. For a moment, silence. Then, Mara laughed. Oh, Kane, what did you do? Darius leaned in. This is the last sovereign king. Mara's smile vanished. The entire room went still. The Black Lotus, the most dangerous woman in the galaxy, looked shaken. That is not a name you say lightly, she murmured. Darius smirked. I don't say anything lightly. The price of protection. Mara stood slowly, stepping toward them, her gaze piercing. She looked at Kale, then at Syria. Finally, her eyes landed on Darius. Do you have any idea what you've done? Darius crossed his arms. I know what's coming. Mara exhaled, shaking her head. If the Sovereign Guard finds out he's here, they will burn Kordath to the ground. Darius met her gaze. Then help us stop them. Mara laughed again, but this time it was hollow. And why would I do that? Darius smirked. Because you don't want them to win either. A dangerous alliance. For a long moment, Mara said nothing. Then she turned to her guards. Prepare the war room. We have a new war to plan. She glanced back at Darius. You always were good at getting into trouble. Darius winked. That's why you love me. Syria groaned. I hate this plan already. Kale finally spoke, looking at Mara. His voice was calm, but certain. Will you protect me? Mara knelt before him, her golden eyes serious. Little king, I will do more than that. She placed a hand over her heart. I will make them regret ever chasing you. The coming storm. The war room inside Mara's fortress was unlike anything Darius had seen before. The walls were covered in holographic star maps, tracking fleet movements, black market deals, and the shifting tides of power in the galaxy. At the center of the room, Mara stood before a glowing map of the Sovereign Guard's movements. Her golden eyes flickered as she studied the enemy's forces. Finally, she looked at Darius. You're asking me to fight a war I can't win. Darius smirked. No, I'm asking you to fight a war they think they've already won. A desperate strategy. Syria stood beside Darius, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. We need to strike first, she said. Mara raised a brow. Strike first? With what army? Darius stepped forward, placing a small data chip on the table. With the ones who hate the Sovereign Guard more than we do. The holographic display changed, revealing a list of names. Mara's lips parted slightly as she read them. You're insane. Darius grinned. That's why this will work. The enemy of my enemy. The names on that list weren't just mercenaries. They were legends. Ghosts. Exiles. War criminals. Renegade captains. People the Sovereign Guard had spent years hunting down. And now, Darius was going to bring them all together. You think these people will fight for you? Mara asked. Darius shook his head. No, they'll fight for themselves. We just need to give them a reason. The Sovereign Guard's trap. A sudden beep from the war table interrupted them. Mara tensed. The hologram shifted, showing a new fleet entering the Kordath system. Syria's breath hitched. They found us. Darius's blood went cold. The Sovereign Guard was here. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Now. The battle for Kordath begins. Mara snapped into action. All forces to battle stations. Get the planetary defenses online. Darius grabbed Syria's hand, pulling her toward the exit. We need to get Kel out of here. Syria hesitated. Then, for the first time, she looked at Darius with complete trust. Where? Darius grinned. To the only people crazy enough to help us. The last gambit. The sirens of Kordath screamed through the fortress, echoing across the metal walls. Darius gritted his teeth as the war room shook, the first wave of Sovereign Guard bombardments striking the city below. The war had begun. Too soon. Too fast. Mara slammed her fist on the console. They didn't wait. They know we're here. Darius cursed under his breath. We need to move. Now. Syria pulled Kel closer, her eyes scanning the war maps. We are outnumbered. They all knew it. Kordath was strong, but against a sovereign fleet, it wouldn't last. Unless. Darius exhaled sharply. He had one last gambit to play. Get to the ships. I have a call to make. A message to ghosts. Darius sprinted through the fortress, dodging falling debris, ignoring the shaking floors beneath him. He reached the old comm station, a relic from a war long forgotten. He slammed his access codes into the console, activating an encrypted frequency that hadn't been used in years. A distress signal. A call to those who had no loyalty to the Sovereign Guard. To those who had no kingdom, no home. To the ones the galaxy have forgotten. This is Captain Kane of the Valkyrie. He took a breath. The Sovereign Guard has come to Kordath. His fingers tightened into a fist. We all know what they do to people like us. To the ones who refuse to kneel. But I'm not running this time. A pause. Then his voice hardened. I don't care what they told you. The Sovereigns are not gone. Their war isn't over. And if you want a shot at payback, if you want to take back what they stole from you, meet me at Kordath's last beacon. He exhaled, then added, almost as an afterthought. Or don't. But if we go down, we're taking some of them with us. He cut the transmission. Now, it was just a waiting game. Would they come? Would the ghosts of the past rise one last time? The Great Escape. Darius raced back toward the docking bays. The Valkyrie was already fired up, her engines glowing, preparing for launch. Syria stood by the ramp, her eyes searching the horizon. Kale clutched her hand, silent but calm. Darius jogged up to them, breathless. We need to buy time for Mara's people to get their defenses up. Syria frowned. How? Darius turned to her, grinning. By doing something really, really stupid. The plan that shouldn't work. The Sovereign Guard fleet hovered above, their crimson warships casting massive shadows over the city. Darius slipped into the pilot's seat, flipping switches as the Valkyrie lurched upward into the sky. Syria sat beside him. What are you doing? Darius smirked, getting their attention. Then, he accelerated, straight toward the Lid Sovereign battleship. Syria's eyes widened. You're insane. Darius winked. Now you're getting it. The Sovereign warships locked onto them, alarms screaming as missiles launched. Darius jerked the controls to the side, barely dodging a blast that could have incinerated them. Syria clenched her fists. If you get us killed, I will haunt you. Darius laughed. Then I better not miss. The turning point. Suddenly, the radar flashed. New ships dropping out of hyperspace. Lots of them. Darius's heart skipped a beat. He glanced at Syria, then back at the screen. They came. The encrypted distress signal had worked. One by one, old warships, battered fighters, pirate cruisers, and outlaw vessels appeared out of the void. The ghosts of the past had answered the call. Darius grinned. Now we have a war. The last stand. The skies of Kordath burned. Sovereign warships descended like falling blades, their crimson hulls reflecting the fires raging across the city. But for the first time in decades, they weren't the only ones in the fight. Darius watched from the cockpit of the Valkyrie as outlaw ships, pirate vessels, and exiled war fleets, those who had once been hunted, rallied against their former oppressors. The ghosts of the past had come to answer the call. And now, the Sovereign Guard was about to face the war they thought they had already won. A battle that shouldn't be possible. Darius's hands flew over the controls, dodging a barrage of laser fire as he weaved through the chaos. Behind him, Mara's forces, a patchwork of broken empires and forgotten warriors, charged straight into the Sovereign fleet. Valkyrie, this is Mara. Her voice crackled through the comms. You better have a damn plan. Darius grinned, dodging another explosion. I do. It's called Don't Die. Mara cursed. I swear, Kane. But her words were cut off as one of her warships exploded, taking down a Sovereign cruiser with it. Darius clenched his jaw. We need to get to their flagship. Syria, seated beside him, turned sharply. That's suicide. Darius smirked. Then it's a good thing I never liked living. The final gambit. The sovereign flagship loomed ahead, a monstrous vessel capable of leveling entire cities. But if they could take it down, the entire fleet would fall into chaos. Darius opened the comms. All ships, listen up. Their flagship is the key. We hit it hard. We break their formation. A pirate captain laughed through the channel. You're insane, Kane. Darius chuckled. Yeah, but at least I'm good at it. Cal's awakening. Then, a pulse of energy surged through the cockpit. Darius's breath hitched as he felt a shift in the air. Something deep, ancient, and terrifying. He turned. Cal was awake, and his violet eyes glowed brighter than ever. Syria's voice trembled. Cal. The child stared at the battlefield, his small hands gripping the edge of the seat. And then, his voice filled the ship. Soft, calm, but absolute. They will not win. Darius had no time to react before the impossible happened. The fall of the Sovereign Guard. The enemy ships stopped moving. For 3 seconds, the entire Sovereign fleet froze in place, suspended like statues in the void. Then, they began to break. One by one, their systems failed, their engines shut down, their weapons disarmed. The Sovereign flagship's shields collapsed. Darius could hardly breathe. He turned to Syria. What the hell did he just do? Syria's lips parted in shock and fear. He took their will to fight. The war ends. Mara's forces didn't hesitate. They struck hard, taking advantage of the sudden weakness in the enemy fleet. Within minutes, the battle was over. The Sovereign Guard was defeated. Their empire shattered. But Darius wasn't celebrating. He turned back to Cal. The boy looked too calm, too powerful. And for the first time, Darius wondered, had they just won a battle, or started something worse? Syria looked at Darius, her voice barely above a whisper. The galaxy is not ready for him. Darius stared at the boy, the child who had just crushed an empire. Then slowly he nodded. Neither am I. The end